This is my midterm family tree project for my intergroup intercultural communications class. The purpose of this is to learn about my family history, learn about the opportunities that my family had, and to investigate any challenges faced by my ancestors. It will provide an understanding and personal connection with my identity, and I can understand any current obstacles that need to be overcome through history. The females in my family had very strong gender roles. They performed domesticated duties, and many of them were employed outside of the home to offer financial contribution. They held strong social skills, and many of them had secondary education. My paternal grandparents, or my father's parents, was Amos Lesher and Charlotte Barnhart Lesher. They lived in Greencastle, Pennsylvania. Lesher is the Americanized form of the German Leschker. My grandfather's family were members of the Anabaptist Dunkard Brethren Church. They believed in baptism representing the Trinity, which was the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Their dress was very plain. They wore long, solid colored dresses that went to the ground and often had bonnets that they wore also. Televisions were not allowed in the home because they were thought to bring evil into the home. Many of his ancestors were rope makers and farmers who grew corn and hay. They also planted orchards in Pennsylvania and grew apples, peaches, and cherries. My grandfather and grandmother owned a dairy farm on the Williamsport Pike in Greencastle until he developed Lou Gehrig's disease and passed away. My paternal grandmother, Charlotte Barnhart, which is the Americanized form of the German Bernhard, were carpenters, many of them crafting furniture, and they were also farmers. An interesting fact about my grandmother was she became enrolled at Shippensburg State Teachers College in 1931, and she received her teaching degree there. From there, she went to teach in a one-room schoolhouse on the Williamsport Pike in Greencastle, which included grades 1 through 12. She retired from Greencastle Antrim Middle School, where she taught sixth grade English. These are two clocks that my paternal grandmother's family built, including my dad, who helped. The one on the left is a schoolhouse regulator clock, and the one on the right is a grandfather clock, which they built by hand using lathes and saws. My maternal grandparents, or my mother's parents, was Robert Wayne Anderson, and my grandmother was Ruth Plume. They resided in Confluence, Pennsylvania, their entire life. My grandfather worked for the C&O Railroad in Confluence, Pennsylvania, which connected the B&O Railroad to Baltimore, Maryland. He installed and repaired railroad tracks as his job, and he was often called out in the middle of the night when there were issues. His relatives were descendants of the Erie Iroquoian Indian tribe that resided in northwestern Pennsylvania. They resided in their own town, which often consisted of long houses which held families. Many generations lived together in one home. They grew crops They raised squash, beans, and corn, which they called the Three Sisters. They also hunted and traded beaver pelts in exchange for supplies. My grandfather's ancestors believed that passage to the next life was not something to be mourned, but something to be celebrated. They often held burials that lasted for 5 days and included singing and dancing. They had music, and they often wore colorful attire during these ceremonies. Every 10 years, a larger ceremony would be held to bury the bones and remaining flesh from the previous individual ceremonies. To them, death was a celebration. My maternal grandmother, Ruth, which was my mother's mother, moved to New Jersey in the 1880s, and the Plumes still reside in New Jersey today. My grandmother and mother worked in the sewing factory in Somerset, Pennsylvania. There were many factories like this during that time, helping to make war attire, and they hired females and children at minimum wages. This is one of the yellow rose quilts that was made by my maternal grandmother and her family. Oftentimes on weekends, they would hold a family dinner while the women sat around the quilting frame and worked on the quilt together as a family. Studying my ancestry allowed me to understand family values and traditions and provided a sense of connection to my ancestors. It can also initiate interest in future generations. It can show the importance of family traditions and provides insight as to where traditions came from. These traditions can strengthen the family bond and identity. Many of our traditions now that we have revolves around our family. We get together regularly through the week, and on holidays, we always get together and celebrate our family. We decorate the tree and bake cookies, and we just are a family-oriented group. Um, most of my family were raised and enjoyed working outdoors. They worked with the land, they grew crops, which is something that me and my children and grandchildren still enjoy doing today. And this is the conclusion.